Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. If you will, like, share, comment on the post, and then we will jump back into Paul's story in Acts chapter 22, and we'll be starting in verse 6 today. We began yesterday by looking at a simple pattern for sharing our faith, for telling others, inviting others to know Christ. And we began with telling people what our life was like before Christ. And very important. I mentioned it yesterday just to remind you again that we don't try to glamorize it or talk about how wonderful we, all those things. But we just simply kind of tell how messed up our life was before we met Christ. And then now we see the second element of inviting someone to follow Christ. Beginning in verse 6, Paul says, "As I was on my way and drew near to Damascus about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. And I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' And I answered, 'Who are you, Lord?' And he said to me, 'I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting.' Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of one who was speaking to me. And I said, 'What shall I do, Lord?' And the Lord said to me, 'Rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do.' And since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me and came into Damascus." And so Paul here recounts for us his conversion experience from Acts chapter 9. And it is, again, largely identical to what is told in that section. He does give us a little more detail here, some things about that event. One in verse 6, when he tells us that it was about noon, so he tells us what time that it happened. He calls Jesus of Nazareth here in this passage. He tells us that he heard a voice, and again, those that were with him heard the voice, but they didn't understand what was being said. And then finally, I think most of us assumed, but here we are told definitively that it was the bright light that resulted in Paul's blindness. And so the second element then of sharing our testimony and inviting somebody to Christ again begins with what your life was like before Christ, and that's your personal story. Nobody can change it. Nobody else can write it. That's your story alone. And then the second element of sharing your faith with someone is really Paul gives great detail here, and I suppose you can as well. Paul has just an amazing story here about it. But if you just want to simplify it again, what my life was like before Christ, and then you can just simply make the statement, then I met Christ. Then I met Christ, and then we'll move on from there into the third element, which is then you tell what your life is like now since you have met Christ. Now, again, Paul gives a good bit of detail here to these who he's talking to, but again, that's not really necessary. I mean, if you do have some, again, great story or some details that you think are important, that no rule against it. I'm just trying to share with you a tried and tested pattern that is quick and simple, requires very little memorization to be able to share it. Again, you know what your life was like. Then just a simple statement, then I met Christ. Again, if you want to fill in some of the blanks, that's great, but not necessary. Again, my objective here is to make you telling your story, giving your testimony as simple as possible. Before Christ, I was wandering around. I was lonely. I knew something was missing. I was, whatever the details may be, I was drinking. I was, again, you don't want to glamorize the lost lifestyle, but I was drinking too much. I was, whatever. My life was a mess. I was headed to divorce. Whatever details you might see, and then the simple statement, and then I met Jesus. Again, you may want to, if you want to dress that up a little bit, say then, my friend invited me to go to church with them in a revival meeting or one Sunday, and I went, and when the preacher started preaching, I felt like he was talking just to me, and I was the only person there. And at the end of the service, I went forward and accepted Christ, and now my life is. And went home and began to work on my life, my marriage, or stopped drinking, or whatever. And so a very simple format. What my life was like before I met Christ, then I met Christ, and now what my life is like since I've met Christ. And that's a simple testimony. It's a simple format. Again, those are three elements that really the only memorization you need is that line, and then I met Christ, because all the rest of it is already there. It's in your experience. And so I hope you'll consider that and keep that in mind, and be alert for opportunities to tell people that story. Again, people will stop and listen to you tell that story. They may not listen to you if you tell them, I want to share some Bible verses with you, or I want to tell you what the preacher said Sunday, but let me tell you a little bit about my story, and you start telling them, this is what my life was like. And then I met Christ, and now this is what my life is like since I've met Christ. And I've got a peace, I've got joy, and you can have that same. You can have that same experience if you just ask Christ into your heart today. And it's a very, very simple and effective way of inviting someone to know Christ by sharing your testimony. That is your testimony alone. No one else has that same story. And so I hope you'll put that in your mind, what my life was like before Christ, then I met Christ, what my life was like since, what my life's been like since I met Christ, and tell that story as often as you get a chance to as many people as possible. Think about it and put it to use today as you go in and out. All right, have a great day. We'll see you here tomorrow morning.